Every countries with thousands years old of ancient traditions and cultures often have interesting ghost and folklore tales, especially the Asian countries where most ancient civilizations and religions came from, based on the history books. Am I right? Tonight you will follow me as we dive into the horror tales from the land of rising sun, Japan. Well known for the samurai tradition as well as the rich history of feudal lords warring for the power and the fame of being a shogun, Japan is also famous for its rich folklore tales, especially in matters of paranormal realm. With that said, do grab a cup of coffee, sit down, and enjoy. In a quiet village nestled in the mountains of Japan, there was a house that had been abandoned for decades. The villagers whispered about the eerie events that had occurred within its walls, attributing them to a ghostly presence known as the Zashiki-warashi. The spirit, a mischievous child ghost, was said to bring good fortune to those who lived with it, but it was also known for playing pranks that sent chills down the spine. One summer, a family of 4 moved into the house. The Tanaka family, Mr. and Mrs. Tanaka, along with their children, Yui and Kenji, had heard the stories but dismissed them as mere legends. They were excited about their new home, charmed by its traditional architecture and scenic surroundings. Little did they know, their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. From the very first night, Yui, the youngest of the family, sensed something strange. As she lay in bed, she heard soft giggles and the patter of tiny feet running across the tatami mats. At first, she thought it was Kenji playing a prank, but when she looked, her brother was fast asleep in the next room. The next morning, Yui told her family about the strange noises. Mr. Tanaka laughed it off. "It's probably just the house settling, Yui. Old houses make noises." Mrs. Tanaka nodded in agreement. "Besides, it's a big change for all of us. We're probably just adjusting to our new surroundings." Kenji, always the skeptic, smirked. "Or maybe it's the Zashiki-warashi coming to say hello." Yui frowned but said nothing more. She didn't want to seem childish, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them. As the days went by, more strange occurrences happened. Objects would move on their own, and items that were placed on a table would end up on the floor. The family would hear giggles echoing through the halls. And once, Mrs. Tanaka swore she saw a small figure darting around a corner. One evening, as the family was sitting down to dinner, the lights flickered and the room grew cold. A chill ran down Yui's spine as she glanced around, feeling the presence of something unseen. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, plunging the room into darkness. Yui felt a tiny hand grasp hers, and she let out a startled gasp. When the lights came back on, no one was there, but the feeling of the small, cold hand lingered. Mr. Tanaka decided it was time to address the situation. "I've heard that Zashiki-warashi can bring good luck to a household. Maybe we should try to communicate with it, show that we're friendly." Mrs. Tanaka agreed. "We should also make an offering, something to show our respect." That night, they placed a small plate of rice cakes and a cup of milk in the center of the living room, a traditional offering to the spirit. Yui and Kenji watched as their parents lit a candle and bowed respectfully. "Zashiki-warashi," Mr. Tanaka said softly. "We welcome you to our home. Please accept our offering and bring us your blessings." The family went to bed, hoping that their gesture would appease the spirit. Yui, still feeling uneasy, kept a flashlight under her pillow just in case. In the middle of the night, she woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Heart pounding, she turned on her flashlight and pointed it toward the source of the noise. Standing at the foot of her bed was a small, pale child with dark, hollow eyes. Yui's breath caught in her throat as the child tilted its head, as if curious about her. "Who are you?" Yui whispered, her voice trembling. The child didn't answer. Instead, it smiled. A chilling, otherworldly smile that sent shivers down Yui's spine. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it vanished into thin air, leaving Yui in stunned silence. The next morning, Yui told her family about the encounter. Mr. Tanaka looked concerned, but he tried to stay positive. Maybe it's a sign that the Zashiki Warashi is accepting us. Mrs. Tanaka nodded, though she seemed worried. We should continue to make offerings and show that we respect it. Over the next few weeks, the Tanaka family made a habit of leaving small gifts for the spirit. They placed toys, sweets, and even flowers in the living room, hoping to maintain a peaceful coexistence. The strange occurrences continued, but they became less frightening, more like playful pranks than malicious acts. Yui and Kenji began to feel more at ease with the ghostly presence. They even started to enjoy the playful antics of the Zashiki Warashi. One evening, as they were playing a board game, they heard the familiar giggle and saw one of the game pieces move on its own. "Looks like we have an extra player," Kenji said with a grin. Yui laughed, feeling a strange sense of affection and care with the unseen spirit. It was almost as if they had gained a new, albeit ghostly, family member. However, not all encounters were playful. One night, Mrs. Tanaka was alone in the kitchen, preparing a late-night snack. She felt a cold breeze and turned to see the small child standing in the doorway. The child's eyes were darker than before, filled with an unspoken sadness. "Are you okay?" Mrs. Tanaka asked gently, feeling a surge of maternal instinct. The child didn't respond, but Mrs. Tanaka felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow. She reached out, but the child vanished before her eyes. Shaken, she finished her task and went to bed, her mind troubled by the encounter. The next day, she shared her experience with the family. "I think the Zashiki Warashi is lonely," she said. "Maybe it needs something more than just our offerings." Mr. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps we should try to learn more about the history of this house. Maybe there's something we can do to help the spirit find peace." The family decided to visit the local library, hoping to uncover the history of their home. After hours of searching, they found an old newspaper article that told a tragic story. Decades ago, a young child had died in the house under mysterious circumstances. The child's parents had moved away, leaving the house abandoned. Yui felt a lump in her throat as she read the article. "Do you think the Zashiki Warashi is that child?" Mrs. Tanaka nodded sadly. "It makes sense. The spirit must be the child who died here, unable to move on." Determined to help the spirit find peace, the Tanaka family held a small ceremony in the living room. They lit candles, offered prayers, and spoke softly to the Zashiki Warashi, expressing their wish for it to find happiness and move on. That night, Yui had a dream. She was in the living room, surrounded by a warm, golden light. The small child stood before her, no longer sad but smiling brightly. The child reached out and took Yui's hand, and she felt a sense of peace wash over her. "Thank you," the child whispered, its voice soft and ethereal. When Yui woke up, she felt a strange calmness. She knew the Zashiki Warashi had found peace. The house was quiet, free from the eerie giggles and mysterious movements. The Tanaka family continued to live in the house, grateful for the experience and the lessons it had taught them. They never forgot the Zashiki Warashi, the mysterious ghost that had once been a part of their lives. They kept a small shrine in the living room, a reminder of the spirit that had brought them closer as a family and taught them the importance of compassion and understanding. Years later, when the Tanaka children were grown and had families of their own, they would tell the story of the Zashiki Warashi to their children, passing down the tale of the mysterious ghost and the summer that changed their lives forever. The legend of the Zashiki Warashi lived on, a testament to the enduring bond between the living and the spirits that walk among us. In the bustling city of Tokyo, there lived a teenager named Hiroshi. He was a typical high school student who loved video games, hanging out with friends, and exploring urban legends. One evening, while Hiroshi and his friends were swapping spooky stories at a local cafe, his best friend Yuto brought up a particularly chilling tale. "Have you heard about kuchisake-onna?" Yuto asked, leaning in closer. Hiroshi raised an eyebrow. "The slit-mouthed woman?" "Yeah, I've heard a few things. Isn't she supposed to ask people if she's pretty? Yuto nodded, his expression serious. Yeah, but there's more to it. They say she wears a mask, and if you answer her wrong, well... Hiroshi laughed nervously. Sounds like something out of a horror movie. Maybe, Yuto replied, but my cousin swears he saw her near Shibuya last week. The rest of the group exchanged uneasy glances, but Hiroshi shrugged it off. Come on, guys. It's just a story. There's no way it's real. Later that night, as Hiroshi walked home alone, the conversation with Yuto lingered in his mind. The streets were unusually quiet, and a thick fog rolled in, giving the city an eerie, deserted feel. Hiroshi quickened his pace, eager to get home. As he turned down a narrow alley, he spotted a figure in the distance. A woman, dressed in a long, dark coat and wearing a surgical mask, stood under a flickering street lamp. Hiroshi's heart skipped a beat. He tried to convince himself it was just a coincidence. But the image of Kuchisake-onna's haunting face loomed large in his mind. The woman slowly turned to face him, and Hiroshi froze. She began walking toward him with deliberate, measured steps. As she drew closer, Hiroshi noticed her eyes, cold and piercing, like they could see right through him. Am I pretty? She asked, her voice muffled by the mask. Hiroshi's blood ran cold. His mind raced. This can't be happening, he thought. It's just a story. Yes. You're pretty, he stammered, hoping to defuse the situation. The woman paused, then reached up and removed her mask. Hiroshi's eyes widened in horror. Her mouth was grotesquely slit from ear to ear, a ghastly permanent smile etched into her face. How about now? She asked, her voice dripping with malice. Hiroshi's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. Yes, you're still pretty, he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. Kuchisake-onna's smile widened impossibly. Liar, she hissed, brandishing a pair of scissors that glinted menacingly in the dim light. Hiroshi turned and bolted, adrenaline fueling his escape. He could hear her footsteps behind him, quick and relentless. He darted through alleyways and side streets, trying to lose her in the labyrinth of the city. Finally, he burst into a crowded main street and glanced back. She was gone. Panting and drenched in sweat, Hiroshi hurried home, locking the door behind him. His heart pounded in his chest as he tried to calm down. He knew he had to tell someone about what happened. But who would believe him? The next day at school, Hiroshi found Yuto and pulled him aside. Yuto, I saw her, he whispered urgently. Kuchisake-onna. She chased me last night. Yuto's eyes widened. You're serious? Hiroshi nodded, recounting the terrifying encounter. I don't know what to do, Yuto. What if she comes after me again? Yuto thought for a moment. There are ways to protect yourself, according to the legend. You need to confuse her, or distract her. Carry candy with you. They say, if you throw it at her, she'll stop to pick it up. Hiroshi was skeptical, but desperate. Candy? Really? Yuto nodded. It's worth a try. And always stay in crowded places. She won't attack if there are too many witnesses. Hiroshi decided to follow Yuto's advice. He stuffed his pockets with candy and avoided walking alone at night. For a few days, nothing happened, and Hiroshi began to hope that the nightmare was over. One evening, as Hiroshi was heading home from cram school, he felt a chill run down his spine. He glanced around nervously, his heart pounding. The streets were eerily quiet, and a sense of dread settled over him. Suddenly, he heard a familiar, chilling voice. Am I pretty? Hiroshi turned to see Kuchisake-onna standing a few feet away, her mask covering her grotesque smile. His heart raced as he fumbled in his pockets for the candy. Yes, you're pretty, he said, his voice trembling. She removed her mask, revealing the horrifying slits. How about now? Hiroshi's hands shook as he threw a handful of candy at her. Kuchisake-onna's eyes widened in surprise, and she crouched down to pick up the sweets. Seizing the opportunity, Hiroshi sprinted away, his legs pumping with fear-driven speed. He didn't stop running until he reached Yuto's house. Banging on the door, he gasped for breath as Yuto opened it, eyes wide with concern. "She found me again," Hiroshi panted. "The candy worked, but I don't know how long I can keep this up." Yuto ushered him inside. "We need to find a way to get rid of her for good." They spent the next few hours researching every piece of information they could find about Kuchisake-onna. They discovered various theories and stories, but one caught their attention. It suggested that Kuchisake-onna was once a beautiful woman who was mutilated by her jealous husband. Her spirit was bound by her anger and pain, unable to find peace. "Maybe we need to help her move on," Yuto suggested. "If we can find a way to release her spirit, she might stop haunting you." Hiroshi nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "But how do we do that?" Yuto read further. "We need to perform a ritual to cleanse her spirit. It involves offering a mirror, a comb, and a piece of red cloth at the place where she was first seen." Hiroshi agreed, and they set out to gather the necessary items. The next night, armed with a mirror, a comb, and a red scarf, they retraced Hiroshi's steps to the alley where he first encountered Kuchisake-onna. The fog was thick, and the air was heavy with tension. Hiroshi and Yuto laid out the items on the ground and lit a small candle. "Kuchisake-onna," Yuto called out, his voice steady despite his fear. "We offer you these gifts. Please find peace and move on from this world." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a cold breeze swept through the alley, extinguishing the candle. The fog seemed to part, revealing Kuchisake-onna standing before them, her expression unreadable. Hiroshi took a deep breath and stepped forward. "You don't have to suffer anymore," he said softly. "We want to help you find peace." Kuchisake-onna's eyes softened, and for the first time Hiroshi saw a glimmer of the woman she once was. She reached out, her fingers brushing the mirror. As she did, her form began to shimmer and fade. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying a note of relief. "I can finally rest." With those words, she vanished, leaving Hiroshi and Yuto standing in the now empty alley. The oppressive feeling lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Hiroshi let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "Is it over?" Yuto nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "I think it is." The two friends walked home, the weight of the past few days lifting from their shoulders. Hiroshi knew he would never forget the encounter with Kuchisake-onna, but he felt a sense of closure. They had faced their fears and helped a tormented spirit find peace. From that day on, Hiroshi carried a new appreciation for the stories and legends that surrounded him. He understood that there was often a deeper truth behind the tales, a lesson about compassion and courage. And though he still enjoyed a good spooky story, he knew that sometimes, even the most terrifying legends could have a happy ending. In the heart of the Japanese countryside, surrounded by dense forests and rugged mountains, there lay a village called Hanamura. The village was known for its breathtaking beauty and its dark, chilling legend, the curse of the Oiranbuchi. The Oiranbuchi, a deep gorge cut through by a swift, roaring river, was a place steeped in sorrow. Centuries ago, it was said to be the site where a group of Oiran, high-ranking courtesans, were betrayed and met their tragic end. Since then, the gorge was believed to be cursed, haunted by the spirits of the betrayed Oiran, who sought revenge on anyone who dared to disturb their resting place. Hiroshi, a city boy with a thirst for adventure, found himself spending the summer in Hanamura with his grandparents. His grandfather, a wise old man named Sato, often told him stories about the village, including the legend of the Oiranbuchi. Hiroshi, however, was skeptical and saw the tale as nothing more than an old folk story. One hot summer afternoon, Hiroshi and his newfound friends, Yuki, Kenji, and Akira, decided to explore the forest surrounding the village. They had heard about the gorge and, driven by curiosity and a desire for adventure, they made it their destination. Are you sure we should go there? Yuki asked, her eyes wide with apprehension. My grandmother says it's cursed. Kenji laughed, trying to hide his own unease. Come on, Yuki. It's just a story. We're not going to get cursed. Akira nodded in agreement. Yeah, let's go check it out. It will be fun. Hiroshi, eager to prove himself brave, led the way. Don't worry, Yuki. We'll be fine. Let's just take a quick look and then head back. The forest grew denser as they approached the gorge, the trees forming a canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air became cooler, and an eerie silence settled around them, broken only by the distant sound of rushing water. As they reached the edge of the Oiran Buchi, they peered down into the dark, churning waters below. The gorge was deep and narrow, its rocky sides covered in moss and vines. Hiroshi felt a shiver run down his spine as he stared into the abyss, but he shook it off, determined not to show fear. See? It's just a gorge, Hiroshi said, forcing a smile. Nothing to be scared of. Suddenly, Yuki gasped and pointed. Look, there's something down there. They all leaned closer and saw what appeared to be an old, ornate hairpin glinting in the sunlight, lodged in a crevice halfway down the gorge. It looked ancient, covered in intricate designs that hinted at its once beautiful craftsmanship. That's definitely from the Oiran, Akira said, his voice tinged with excitement. We should try to get it. Kenji shook his head. No way, it's too dangerous. But Hiroshi, eager to prove his bravery, began to climb down, ignoring his friend's protests. He moved carefully, his hands gripping the rough rocks as he descended towards the hairpin. Hiroshi, be careful, Yuki called out, her voice trembling. As Hiroshi reached for the hairpin, the rocks beneath his feet shifted, causing him to lose his balance. He grabbed the hairpin just as the ledge gave way, and he fell, plunging into the icy waters below. The current was strong, pulling him under as he struggled to stay afloat. His friends screamed in terror, helpless to save him. Hiroshi's vision blurred as he fought against the rushing water, clutching the hairpin tightly. Just as he thought he would be swept away, he felt himself being pulled to the surface. He gasped for air, coughing and sputtering, and saw the faint outline of a woman in traditional dress standing on the water, her face hidden in shadow. Leave this place, she whispered, her voice echoing in his mind, or face the curse of the Oiran Buchi. With a final push, the woman flung Hiroshi towards the shore. He crawled onto the bank, exhausted and trembling. His friends rushed to his side, relief and fear etched on their faces. What happened? Kenji asked, helping Hiroshi to his feet. Hiroshi, still shaken, looked at the hairpin in his hand. I saw her. One of the Oiran. She saved me. Yuki's eyes widened. We need to get out of here. Now. They hurried back to the village, Hiroshi clutching the hairpin as if it were a lifeline. When they arrived at his grandparents' house, they told his grandfather what had happened. Sato's face grew pale as he listened. You must return the hairpin, he said gravely. The spirits of the Oiran will not rest until it is back where it belongs. Hiroshi nodded, determined to set things right. That night, under the cover of darkness, the four friends made their way back to the gorge. The forest seemed even more sinister in the moonlight, shadows dancing around them as they moved. At the edge of the gorge, Hiroshi held the hairpin over the churning waters below. We have to put it back, he said, his voice firm. It's the only way to lift the curse. Yuki, Kenji, and Akira stood by his side, their faces serious. Hiroshi took a deep breath and dropped the hairpin into the gorge. It disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the raging river. For a moment there's a dawaim mersor was dur, shor tsamailetrin yola al sinmars. Then the air grew colder, and a low, mournful wail echoed through the gorge. The friends huddled together, their hearts pounding. Out of the mist, the ghostly figure of the Oiran appeared, her face now visible, a mixture of sadness and relief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The curse is lifted. We can finally rest. As she faded away, the air grew warmer, and the oppressive feeling lifted. The friends breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing they had done the right thing. The next day, the village seemed brighter, the air filled with a sense of peace. Hiroshi and his friends gathered at his grandparents' house, feeling a new bond forged by their shared adventure. "You were brave, Hiroshi," Yuki said, smiling. "You saved us all." Hiroshi shrugged, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it together." From that day on, the legend of the Oiran Buchi became a story of courage and friendship, passed down through the generations. Hiroshi and his friends never forgot their encounter with the spirits of the gorge, and they made a pact to always respect the legends and the history of their village. As they grew older, they continued to explore and seek out new adventures. But they always remembered the lesson they learned at the Oiran Buchi. Some stories are more than just tales, and sometimes the past reaches out to those willing to listen and make things right. The summer ended, and Hiroshi returned to the city. But he carried the memory of Hanamura and the Oiran Buchi with him. He knew he would return one day, not just for the adventures, but for the sense of connection he felt with the village and its history. And so, the curse of the Oiran Buchi was lifted, but the legend lived on, a reminder of the power of bravery, friendship, and respect for the past.
If you enjoyed the story, you can support me more by subscribing to this channel. Your support will help me to gather more stories like this from any places I travel to. Until then, stay safe. May the blessings of God be with you.